So welcome everyone to this lunch webinar where we will talk about the Onto-DESIDE project, a Horizon funded project that is about to end this month. So this is sort of a rounding off the project as well, where we will talk about some training material, some guidebooks that we've developed in the project to allow you to use what we've done in the project after we finish it. And this is what we will be presenting today. And my name is Eva Blomqvist. I'm the project coordinator. And if you have any questions during the webinar, we will take questions at the end of the presentations, but also feel free to note down my email if you think of a question afterwards. Now, let's see if I can also switch slides. That would be nice. No, that's the next challenge. So just to tell you a few words about the project. These are the partners of the project, and we worked for 3.5 years on this project, and we've had 3 nice industry use cases where we also tried out these technologies. One in the textile industry, one in electronics, and one in the construction industry. And we will take some examples from construction in this webinar. So what are actually the things we've done in this project? Well, we have 3 main parts of the results. So the first piece of the puzzle that we've developed is the multi-flow method, which is a methodology for thinking strategically about your value chains and developing them in a way that they become profitable and sustainable. And the key here is that we cannot think about individual flows like the material flow alone, but we need to think about also values and information that has to flow at the same time. So we will have a section of the webinar when you will hear more about this part. And the other 2 pieces of the puzzle are a platform for sharing data, which is based on existing web standards. So basically showing you how you can apply these existing web standards without reinventing the wheel or doing something completely new. You can use the web to securely and in a decentralized way share your data in these value chains. But the glue that is needed to actually do this is an ontology network. So something that you can use to describe your data and create the necessary semantic interoperability that is needed to translate from different formats, from different standards, and so that we can actually understand each other and share this data using the technical platform. So these are the 3 components we will be talking about today. But before we go into details, I want to also introduce you a little bit to the challenges we worked with in the project. So to make a circular economy in general or one of these value chains work, we need to consider a lot of things. It's actually quite a complex thing. So there are lots of processes going on. You have manufacturing, there's use of the product, and what do you do at the end of the life of the product. And you cannot really look at these in isolation because everything is actually connected. And all of these end-of-life options are also connected. So reuse is one option, but you may be able to recycle. And how do you pick between these and so forth? So everything is really connected. But what they do have in common is that to make this happen, we need to exchange data and information. And if you zoom in a little bit on one example of a value chain, you can see that, okay, in each step of one of these circles, in this case, the example is recycling, we will have a lot of different actors illustrated here by different colors. And each of them has their own data sets, their own databases, documents, and so forth. They will be using their own formats and standards and so forth. So how can we make sense of this, and how can we start to allow information to flow along with the materials in these cycles? So the vision is sort of this, that we want to see information flowing freely so that we can actually cycle these resources again and again. But this requires interoperability. So how can we create this interoperability and yet keep the data secure? Because a lot of the data will be confidential. We don't want to share it with just anyone, but we want to keep things safe. How can we do that? And one particular thing that is standing in the way of doing this is semantic interoperability, which is really one of the core challenges that we've looked at in this project. And I will take a small sequence here of slides to try to give you a feeling of what do I mean by semantic interoperability. So when we each look at the world, we see it from different perspectives because we have different purposes with looking at it. So if we look at the product, one person might see the functionality of the product, while the other one sees the material content of the product. So we all have our different perspective, and this perspective will be used to organize our data. So we will have formats and templates and so forth that fit to our worldview, of course. And that means we also store data in different formats. We will have different databases where we keep our data. And in the end, we build different kinds of applications that work for our specific perspective. But in the end, here, data becomes siloed. It's stuck inside of these applications, and it's stuck to the specific formats that we are using. And this, of course, makes data sharing hard. So it's time consuming, and we may not understand each other and so forth. But what we've focused on is to create some middle ground here. So a shared ontology, so a kind of shared language that provides definitions that we can relate to. All of us will not have exactly the same data, but we need something in common so that we can start to extend that and explain how our data relates to that common shared ground. And then we can create interoperable versions of our databases so that we can actually start using this common language to share also our data. Which means that, the data will still be stored with each organization. So that's the decentralized part. We need to be in control of our data. But if we can do this in a secure way, then we can also build trust and start to share with those we want to share with. And in the end, build on top of that to build APIs to access our data and to build new applications with new functionalities that take advantage of the possibility to access all these data at once from all the different actors. So going back to this image I had at the beginning there, how can we allow all these actors then to collaborate? Well, we've built this central piece here, the ontology network, which is the shared vocabulary that you can relate to, you can extend with your standards, with your terminology, and then start to describe how that maps to someone else's vocabulary, to someone else's standards and formats. And in this way, we can start to translate between data from one actor to another. But additionally, we also need to have this, the data sharing infrastructure that provides the security we need to actually exchange this information. And this is indicated by this SS here, which means solid, and we will hear more about what that is in a little bit later on, but using the web infrastructure basically to allow this secure data sharing to happen. Based on that, we have described our data. And of course, before we can do any of that, we have to make sense of the value chains, which is the third piece of the puzzle, or the first one that I talked about, the multi-flow method that allows you to analyze how is this actually going to work. So what we are doing is really trying to enable an automated way to decentrally share data in a secure way, where we can actually understand each other and where we can reuse and make use of all this data that is distributed over the actors in the value flow. So today we will look at these two guidebooks that we've created in the project, where we have explained more in detail how you can use these methods. So there is one first guidebook which describes the multi-flow method for understanding your flows and analyzing the circular value chains. And then there is a second guidebook which is on these two technical results that we have. How can you use this ontology network and the decentralized data sharing platform, which we call the Open Circularity Platform. So these are the two pieces that we will look at more in detail now. And with that, I would hand over to Fenna Blomsma, who will present the first guidebook.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Eva. We just take a minute to transition the presentations.
Yes.
Then we're off. Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce to you the first guide. And as Eva mentioned, this guide focuses on the strategic development of circular value chains, right? How is your value chain going to function? How is it going to be made into a robust and well-functioning whole? And before we get into that, a little bit of background sort of to the tools and the toolkit that we've extended here. Because innovating for a circular economy is different than innovating in a linear economy. Not in the first place, because we have so many different circular strategies to think about, right? Repair, reuse, recycling, industrial symbiosis. There's a lot of different circular strategies that could apply. But which ones actually make sense for your context? Right? There's lots of them that fit under this circular economy umbrella. Figuring out which circular strategies actually make sense for you and your context and your value chain as a whole, you have some freedom because of that. Right? There's a large menu of circular strategies to choose from. But with that great freedom also comes great responsibility to make sure that you're creating real benefits, that you're addressing real problems with this. So there's lots of different circular strategies to make sense of. But also, guys, on to the next slide. There's not just lots to choose from. We want to put all these different circular strategies together in a way that they work together with each other. They are synergistic with each other. What we want to avoid is that they compete with each other, or that they exist in a situation where there are trade-offs. So you can do one, but not the other. So ideally, we want to use as many reuse cycles as possible, then as many remanufacturing and refurbishment cycles as possible, followed by the reuse of parts, and then the high quality recycling of materials. And if we do this, and if we do each step of the way to high quality and high performance, then we should be able to do this again, again, and again. We can restart this loop. But for that, as I mentioned, it's really important to make sure that these circular strategies don't compete with each other, right? So we need to kind of keep that in mind as we're developing the circular value chain from the start. And to be able to do this, we kind of need new eyes to look at this system, right? We know that there is a circular menu to choose from, different circular strategies, but instead of optimizing with a linear mindset, thinking in terms of linear value chains, where you would optimize locally, we now want to optimize all of the different circular strategies so that they actually work together. And that means that we need to think in terms of systems, right? How do all of the different parts behave and how can they collaborate and compete in a way that make sense. And this is sort of the type of thinking that underpins the Circularity Thinking Toolkit. This was already an existing toolkit before Onto-DESIDE started, but Onto-DESIDE allowed us to extend with a module that takes this to the next level. And really focusing on sort of untangling and engaging with the complexity that is involved in thinking in these terms. Right. So this is a picture to sort of show how circular value chains ideally would develop, right? Because we can't create these synergistic value chain configurations all in one go, right? We have to be practical about it. So if we have created a vision of where we want to move, then we can start in the here and now, do the circular strategies that are the most pressing, that give us a good foundation to then add slowly more and more strategies over time, right? This is kind of what we want to do. Now, having that vision in the end is really important because that means that the steps that we are taking now, we can do them in such a way that we already design out the conflicts between the strategies as much as possible, right? So that we already start working towards the synergistic set of circular strategies from the beginning. So that as a general background, now to move on to the process of circularity thinking itself. Because some of these modules that circularity thinking consists of already existed, right? So understanding the now, mapping the flows using the circularity compass, one of the templates that is central to the methods, right? What is the current situation? What to focus on? What is important? Those types of decisions we make in the first step. And then we move on to understanding the problem. And this means thinking in terms of sort of the seen and obvious types of waste, but also the less obvious types of waste that might be more hidden. And when we've understood that and how that creates sort of all these negative effects, then we can move on to sketching a solution, right? A first idea of what a circular configuration might look like. So once you've done the first 3 steps, you have a sort of a decent idea of what might be in it for you, what kind of value can be created, or how problems in the current value chain can be addressed. But of course, it's not enough to just think in terms of the resource flows. We also need to think about the value flows, the energy flows, and of course, the information flows that make it all work. That is what step 4, this new tool developing the system focuses on, is how the different flows can be integrated to make the whole. Other modules that are not covered in the guide that we're launching today, those guides will follow a little bit later, focus on sort of the roles and the responsibilities, what they need to look like, right? All of the activities and how they can be coordinated across the different actors. And also how do you bridge from the now to the future? How do you break all of that down into collective action plans that combine both sort of the traditional management approaches with command and control, with the approaches that are aimed at learning, iterating, and piloting and testing. Circularity thinking is this active development at my chair going on to further develop and make those tools more robust as we learn more about how circular economy work and should work. All right. So I just want to say that circularity thinking is available on the under Creative Commons 4.0 license. And that is an attribution, non-commercial, non-derivatives license. And that means that I would like to be attributed, right? All the work that goes on here. It is free to use in a very, very large amount of circumstances. But if there's commercial use, then a small fee does apply, which will be reinvested in the development of circularity thinking as a platform. So I just wanted to flag that upfront. It's also mentioned in the guides. And I think with that, I've talked enough. I want to hand over to Kaius to tell you a little bit more about the multi-flow method in particular. So over to you, Kaius.
All right, thank you, Fenna. Yeah, my name is Karl Südke, and I will take you through the multi-flow method that we have developed within Onto-DESIDE. And while the first steps of circularity thinking that Fana just briefly touched on help you to understand the current situation and define a circular direction, the multi-flow method looks at how the system behaves and why it behaves the way it does, and what is needed to shift for circularity to actually work. The goal of our method is to unpack the forces that are behind the different flows of the value chain. And the method helps you to extend the view beyond material flows and further look into value flows, information flows, energy, and how that shapes what becomes possible. And with that, it also helps you to explore what is necessary for a circular configuration to become feasible and robust. So it helps you to look beyond feasibility, technical feasibility, and also ask what systemic shifts are needed to realize a circular configuration. And the method is best used when you're dealing with complex systems and when complexity is present and potentially misalignment also exists. So when actors, incentives, information, and they don't really line up, and when we need more clarity on why the system behaves as it does, and when we want to understand the deeper dynamics, so patterns, tensions, interdependencies between actors, rather than just ending up with a list of barriers or enablers. And simply put, that means that the method helps you to answer the question, what forces shape how all the resource, value, information, and energy flows flow? And at the core of our method are two parts. So the first part are the different flows. The method goes beyond material flows. Resources only move because value, information, and energy make them move. And so those flows often also explain why something works or doesn't work in practice when you take a closer look at them. And so we map these flows together to get a more complete picture of how the system functions. And with that, information flows looks at what do actors know, what do they need to know, how they can coordinate. Value flows looks at who gains, who pays, where is value lost, and also energy flows. So what is the energy demand, or how can sourcing determine whether we choose recovery or remanufacturing? And then a second part of the method is that we want to look closer than just the flows. So the second component of the method is exploring three tensions that appear in circular value chains. And the tensions, we use them sort of as a lens to look at the system and dig deeper. And we look at individual versus collective interest as the first one. So where does individual gain conflict with system-wide value? Or we look at robustness versus adaptability, and where does that get in the way? So too much stability, not enough flexibility. How do those two interact? What is present? Or also we have concentration versus distribution as our third tension. And this is where value, data, or influence, where does that sit? Is that, does one actor have a powerful position by holding either decision power or a lot of value or information? And together, these flows and tensions help us uncover the patterns. And this is what we're going to go over in the method. So here you can see on the picture a full, a full overview of the method. And as we have sketched a circular configuration in the first step that Fana briefly touched on, we now extend this view beyond material flows. Then in the next step, we explore the key tensions and use them to gain insights about the system. And from there, we want to get a little bit more structure into our insights and define existing and desired patterns. And then lastly, we want to summarize these into what we call ecosystem requirements. So we want to look into what can we already build on and what is still missing. And now we briefly look at each step a bit closer. But to make the method more concrete, we also want to touch on an example that is also featuring in the guide. And in our example, we talk about the reuse of building doors. So the pre-work that was completed in this example is understand the now, the waste hunt, and the configuration builder. And so what we ended up with is the image that you can see at the moment. That is an overview of the resource flows mapped for the reuse of doors. And then in the boxes, you can see things that we anticipate need to be changed from the system, from the current situation as it is to making it a reuse example. Now the first step. In the first step, we extend beyond materials. And the goal here is to make visible how value, information, and energy interact with resource flows, to then better understand where are kind of like pinpoints that we can address. We build on what's already there. So on the image on the right, you can see that we have used the resource flows from the previous image as the foundation, and we have layered the value flows, the value flow mapping for door reuse on top of it. So here, for example, you can see that the demolition contractors are paid to dispose of the doors by the building owner, and the building owner also pays for demolition, but they also lose the value of the material. This is a step-by-step process described in the guide, and you will do this for one flow at a time, and you will start with the one that you see as most critical. We here saw that value flows would be a good starting point, and it's also important to keep a system-wide perspective. So we don't want you to just look at your own organization, but also ask yourself who needs to be involved for this to work, what infrastructure is necessary, and what relationships exist or do not exist. And this step doesn't need to be perfect. We're not analyzing anything yet. We're just wanting to create a shared picture that's good enough for you to take then the next step based on this. And when you have mapped 2 more flows, then we would consider this step complete. And now that we've mapped the flows, the next step is to look at why they behave the way they do. And this is where we used our lens of generative tensions for. And the goal here is to use the tensions as a lens for, to surface the underlying forces really. And rather than listing barriers or enablers, get down to the deeper causes, trade-offs. And we do this one tension at a time. So you choose a flow, and usually where you see the biggest issues in the previous steps, that's where you would start. And then you explore it one flow and one tension at a time. And for that, we have an overview of guiding questions in the guide for each flow, each tension, that will facilitate a conversation for you to have on these tensions. And it helps us to get an overview of where individual interests conflict with collective outcomes and so on. And in the reuse example, we see, for example, that with regard to individual versus collective interest, that the demolishers prioritize the disposal because it's cheaper for them. And this is material loss for the entire system, or also related to robustness versus adaptability, that standard demolition contracts emphasize fixed prices and timelines, so there's no flexibility. And when is the step finished? You don't need to cover every flow or every tension. This step is exploratory, so we're trying to look into a broad range of possible causes, but you don't need to cover all flows or all tensions. And when you have a handful of underlying forces become visible, then you put them on Post-its and you move on to the next step. In this step, we want to get a bit more organization into the findings that we had in the previous step. So the goal here is to identify patterns, and we want to look into the recurring dynamics or things that happen again and again, or that we want to happen again and again for these patterns. So what we really do is moving from like the scattered insights from the previous step now to a more organized framing. And we begin with existing patterns, and they capture the patterns that are already present in the system. So for example, asking what keeps happening, or why do actors behave like a certain way? Why does the system drift back to the same outcome again and again. And once we know the patterns that do exist, we then move on to desired patterns. For that, we want to find out what would enable circularity, what would make the system work. And this is sort of where the tensions become more generative. So instead of seeing problems, we want to reframe them as opportunities for redesign. And an example for an existing pattern in the reuse of doors is that the current cost structures and demolition incentive incentivize rapid disposal over recovery. And then we have the systemic loss. And this step is really about moving from broad insights to understanding existing patterns and explain why something happens. And you are finished with this step when there is a clear set of patterns. You take these patterns to the next step and the last step of the method, which is defining ecosystem requirements. The previous step looked at how the system should behave, and now this step looks at what must we actually do to enable those patterns. So the patterns describe what should happen. The ecosystem requirements, on the other hand, look at what the system must offer or enable. And yeah, in this step, you start by reviewing the different patterns and the possible overlaps from the different flows. And then you end up with like a condensed version of ecosystem requirements of offerings and what we call needs. So the offerings give you what is already in place. For example, when you start and do this work with your value chain partners, you hardly ever start from scratch because there are existing tools, infrastructure, relationships, something you can build on. But there will be things, for example, capabilities or infrastructures that are lacking at the moment and that we need to find out what we need to do with that. And this is an important step because the change that you want to enable usually doesn't have to start from like ground zero. So this also acknowledges that maybe good things are already happening, but we need to build on that. And with that, we come to the outcome of the multi-flow method. So what do we end up with after you completed the multi-flow method? We get a shared set of existing and desired patterns. We identify ecosystem requirements, what we can build on and what is missing. And together, this really gives us a system-wide perspective or picture that puzzles together the different pieces. So we have the flows, the tensions, patterns, and requirements, and it helps actors to really put on their systemic thinking hat and look beyond their own organization. And the value of that is that it prepares us for action by clarifying what the system would actually need. And it also helps us to think in a more systematic or systemic way and moving beyond just our own organization. It helps us to understand what is technically possible, but also what is systemically necessary. And it points us to leverage points and enables more robust and scalable strategies. Now that we have presented our method, we would love to continue the work and conversation with you on it. We have tested the multi-flow method already in practice, but of course the tools grow stronger as we have more and more iterations of that. So if you're interested to apply the method within your value chain, we're really happy to support that. We'd love to hear your insights, questions, and experiences on it. So please reach out if you're curious or eager to collaborate. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Fenna.
Well, I just want to reiterate, please get in touch if you're interested in taking any of this up. I hope that's clear, right? It's to not get stuck in sort of analysis paralysis when you start to look at barriers and enablers. Instead, what the multi-flow method is trying to do is go one level deeper. What connects multiple of these barriers and enablers? How do we get to the forces that actually shape them? And if we can see that, then we can also do something with or about them. Okay, and then I'm going to hand it back to Eva with the note that so this helps you think strategically about your circular value chain, because you've explored multiple flows, and one of them being information flows. That helps you think about what should the information flows do, what should they be in service of, how should they work. And that is the input for the next guide, the starting point of the next guide that helps you then go further with that. So this is the strategy, this is what it should do. Now, how do we actually put that in place? Over to you, Eva.
Thank you very much, Fenna, and thank you, Karis. So yes, as Fenna was saying, now we will take a look at the technical part to see how can we get this all to work for the information flows. So I will now try and share the slides, and let's see if we can get a full screen, and hopefully it's the full screen.
And this is the presentation view, the presenter view.
Okay, of course, every time.
Yes.
Now?
All good.
Okay, great. So always this step of checking. Yes, so this was now what is in the first guidebook, let's say, that we have published on the website and from the project. And now we're moving to the second guidebook where we look at the data sharing platform and the semantic interoperability, as we've talked about before. This will be presented by me and by Ben de Meester from IMEC Center in Belgium. And well, he will jump in a moment when we come to the platform parts. And then there was the thing about switching slides. There we go. So we will first take a look at get an overview of the technical platforms that we've developed. Then we will look into the different steps that are described in this guidebook, which will lead you to be able to set up such an infrastructure for your own case, for your own value chain. And we will also take an example related to this reuse of doors, same as Fenna was and Karis was using in their examples. So we will take you through it with an example, basically. So just to come back to what we talked about in the first in my first presentation, we have these three pieces of the puzzle, and now we've heard about the first one, the purple one to the left. We've heard about the multi-flow method so far, and now we will look at these two other pieces of the puzzle and what they actually mean. And I mentioned already earlier that the glue is the semantic interoperability. So you have to have a way of describing your data because you will have a lot of different perspectives in these value chains. And you need to have a way to map between these perspectives. So you need something that allows you to describe your data. And this is the ontology network that we've built. And the idea is also that this is supposed to not be a new ontology for everything, but something that allows you to align to existing ontologies, existing standards, and so forth. So the glue that can put everything together, basically. And to give you a little bit more detail on what we've built there in terms of the ontologies, you can see an image here on the right-hand side, and this image, the boxes are not concepts in the ontologies, is modules. So each of these boxes then contains basically one ontology, which is connected to other ontologies into a network of ontologies. And the idea with this modular design is that you should be able to reuse the pieces that you need and don't have to care about the whole thing. So if you are have data about the actors in the value chain, you need the actor module, and you may not need all of the other ones. Or if you're describing products, you may need the product module and maybe something else, but not the whole thing. And the idea is also that you should be able to extend and connect to this with your own ontologies, your own extensions, or other existing ontologies. So we have created 3 example ontologies from the project use cases that extends this. So this is the textile, construction, and electronics boxes at the bottom. But we also have a number of alignments to related ontologies in different domains, circular economy ontologies, but also other things like the MO upper ontology for materials, for instance. And you can find the references to all of these things if you go to this URI here, where you have a landing page where we list all of these modules and components. There you can find more information about them. But then let's look at the final piece of the puzzle, Ben.
Yes, hi everyone. So I'm Ben de Meester. I'm Ben de Meester. I'm from Ghent University IMEC from Belgium. So our team worked on the open circularity platform. So where the Sion ontology is about semantic interoperability, making sure that we all speak the same language. The open circularity platform is about technical interoperability, making sure that we can actually connect the dots on a technical level. We focused on three functional requirements. So the first one is keeping control over your own company data. So instead of having this one centralized system that manages all this data and does matchmaking and all these kinds of things, we really focused on keeping control over your company data. Secondly, we focused on being able to manage the data independent of an application using it. So we don't propose this one application to replace all the other existing ones. We really focused on interoperable technical APIs so that it's technically easy to connect data from different organizations without limiting ourselves to one specific type of application. And then finally, combine all the data from those different actors, different organizations in your network on the fly. And then you can go to the next slide, Eva. And then secondly, more non-functional requirements we focused on was, first of all, working on any existing data management system. So extending your existing software stack, etc., and don't replace with whatever we propose here. Secondly, we really focus on a long-term vision for data sharing. So we base ourselves on standards where possible, making this ready for the future. And finally, but very important, of course, making sure that the platform is secure and safe. So making sure that you only share those parts of data with the people that you want to share it with people that you trust, with the people that you want to share it with, in a way that it is secure and also tamper-proof, so you can be sure that the data that you want to share ends up at the right hands. A short overview of how this looks like, and if you can go to the next slide. We start from these existing data services in your own organization, and then we have that Sion ontology. So then we, as a first part, we propose, next slide, indeed mapping to that Sion ontology using mapping software, which is using the RML standards to do so. And then next slide, you have a way to securely share that data within your network. And for that, we use the solid open standards. This is a set of steps that needs to happen for every actor in the network. Next slide. But once you have done that, then you can, and that's next slide, really integrate all that data from these different actors securely across the network, again, using a standard called Sparkle, as if it was one big single database. And then finally on top, we have a demonstrator application, which is called Miravi, which is really to showcase how sharing this data would allow for different types of applications, different types of exchanging data in a secure way. And then it's back to you, Eva.
Thank you, Ben. So these are the pieces of the puzzle, let's say, and what we then describe in this training material, this guidebook, are 10 steps for how you can set this up for your use case, for your value chain. So this is an overview of the 10 different steps, and we will now take you through these steps by using an example. So the example we will use is the same as in the previous presentation. So the reuse of doors, and there is a description in this guidebook about how there is some building owner that prepares for demolition of a building and then wants to allow these doors to be reused instead of just throwing them away. And that there is some marketplace, digital marketplace for used construction equipment where these doors could actually be posted. So this is the scenario, the example scenario that we're using for taking you through these steps. And the first step is, as Fenna and Karis already mentioned, that, okay, first you need to understand your value chain. You need to understand what is the information that we need to share, who are the actors that we need to collaborate with, and so forth. So basically this analysis is, of course, the first step to determine what you're working with here and who needs to share things with whom. And then back to Ben.
Then steps 2 and 3 is really a bit more on technical level. How can we then find the data match between these different actors? So step 2 is all about describing the data needs. So if we take an example of being able to resell used doors, then there are certain needs from the buyer's side. It needs to know, of course, the door dimensions, what materials the door is from, what kind of pricing strategy or pricing is available, what the transport costs are, etc., to have an idea whether this strategy is viable. That is step 2, the data needs, and then step 3, we have the data inventory. And that is more on the seller side. So there we can see for a person who has doors available, what information is already available. So for example, in system A, the door dimensions are available. In system B, the pricing is available, and the location is typically something sent by email, as an example. And then when we have those two steps, we can start seeing where is the overlap, is there a match available between the needs and the data inventory. And then we can see whether we need additional data sources, etc. So if you can go to the next slide, you then see, for example, that we can estimate the transport costs based on the location. The materials are maybe found in an external catalog that we can use. And by following these steps, we can then come to basically the conclusion of saying, yes, it makes sense to share data across these actors, because this allows us to fulfill the circularity strategy that we found in step 1. And then next slide, once we can go ahead, we go to the setup. How can we technically set up this data sharing system? As said, we set up an open circularity platform, and the guide provides all these kinds of documentation of how to set this up yourself. We rely on the solid specifications, which is a set of really available standards to use. So this allows anyone to want to take part in the open circularity platform to choose how they set up these services themselves. So you could build your compliance server yourself if you have enough technical expertise. You could buy it and set it up in-house, or you can rent it. You could buy it as a software as a service. Within the guides, we provide documentation for setting up a MIT licensed community solid server yourself. Because if you buy it from a vendor, of course, you have all the documentation available from them. But this also gives you an opportunity to try it out for yourself, of course, if you have the expertise to do it so. And I think this allows us to go to the next slide, and back to you, Eva.
Yes, thank you, Ben. So, but before you can actually put your data there and start sharing it, then you need to think about the semantic interoperability, as I introduced it before. So you need to map all this data to this common language, to the shared definitions, so that you can actually start to translate between these data sources that Ben were talking about that you found in the inventory. Because just because the data is there doesn't mean that it's in the same expressed in the same way or from the same perspective that you need it. So the idea here is to look at these ontologies that we built and to see whether it already covers the needs if it already covers the data that you are going to share, then all is fine. However, in many cases, of course, your data will be much more specific than what these ontologies provide. So the ontologies may talk about products in general, but you may want to model specifics of doors in this case. So you could extend these ontologies then, and you can reuse things, for example, from common standards like IFC, and you could use common ontologies like the building topology ontology if you want to talk about the location of the doors inside the building and so forth. So this step is really about figuring out if you need to extend this existing ontology network in order to properly describe this data so that you can start to translate between the data sources. And then we go over to Ben.
And now we end up in the most technical steps of the guide. So you also notice how more detailed these things get. It's also why these are 3 steps, because we know they're very technical, so we try to give as much details and documentation as we can. These steps are really the final connection point of going from the existing data that you have and really technically map them to the Sion ontology, basically what a developer would do. So using our RML, we provide a standardized system to map existing data from any data management system that you already have to the Sion ontology. And then using Sparkle, we provide a standardized way to query that diverse but mapped data. So if we go to an example, it's on the next slide again. For example, we want, as a seller, we want to exchange the door dimensions, and we know that our system A, it's an internal CRM, has CSV export functionality to export those door dimensions. What these steps 6 to 8 basically cover is, once you know that's the Sion structure, so for example, Sion allows you to specify the door dimensions as follows: a product has a height, has a width, and has a thickness. Then within steps 6 to 8, we show how, using RML, we can state that we map specific column from that CSV to this Sion structure, and then using Sparkle, you can create a query that looks for those door dimensions. This is quite technical. It's something that is quite specific, but also only needs to be done once. So once we have this for these door dimensions, we can reuse them in very different applications. So in a marketplace, in a compliance checking application. So it really meant to be a solve once, use everywhere type of system. And as we're aware that this is a very technical part, we also have all the detailed guides available just on the next slide, how you really go from the existing data through the entire mapping process, so you can give read access to the actors in your network, so that you can really start exchanging data. So this is all all the technical stuff is set up, and now we can talk about applications. And so we have set up a Miravi, which is a demonstrator for different applications. So it's really a proof of concept to show how exchanging data could provide for new types of applications. So this is the video that you see here is a marketplace dashboard that is running live, so federating decentrally shared data, allows you to export it, reuse it in your existing system, etc., etc. But as I said, it's a prototype demonstrator application. So on the next slide, you can see the marketplace basically shows the batches for sale if you are part of the Open Circularity platform. And then if you want to see prices, and that's on the next slide, you can log in and then you can have customized prices. This is all demonstrator, so it's not don't take the data that you see here for truth. It's just to show that it can work, and it allows you to exchange data and integrate data from all these different sources into one dashboard. This is to demonstrate. Of course, the idea is that this data exchange is integrated in existing applications. So the next slide shows, for example, Concular, a partner of the consortium, that has this kind of door reuse marketplace. So the idea is that once you have all this data available, you can integrate it in existing applications, so you can provide better information exchange and in general better service offerings for existing organizations out there. And finally, that's step 10. That's about evolution. As said, we really took special care to make sure that the solutions that we created here are for the long term. So we've tried to follow mature standards where possible. And in the final step of the guide, we included additional documentation, what to do when things change. For example, if your internal data source changes, if your internal system changes, how do you update these mappings, how to add a new data need to the system if you have new use cases, how to update the software, etc. And that's also the case for the Xeon ontology. They are extensible by design, so it's also detailed there how you can cover new concepts within these ontologies where needed.
Thank you, Ben. So just bringing up this picture again, the overview of the 10 steps. So this is what we've walked you through now very, very briefly. Of course, there are lots more details in these guidebooks and lots more examples of different strategies as well, not only reuse, but other kinds of examples that you can look at, and maybe that resonates more with your specific use case. So in summary, we've now covered first in another presentation this multi-flow method, and now you've seen a brief walkthrough of these two technical results that we have, the Open Circularity Platform based on existing web standards, and the ontology network that allows you to describe your information so that you can share it with others. And the idea here is really to enable data sharing to be automated and effective, and in a decentralized but secure way, allow you to stay in control of your data, but still to be able to exchange it with others, and to make it possible to actually reuse and understand other people's data. So to move back to the overview, we have now covered these two guidebooks that we have, and you have some QR codes there that should lead you to the actual documents if you want to take a look. They are on our website. And if you want to also continue the discussion around these topics, we have created a community group, a W3C community group, where we will also continue beyond the Onto-DESIDE project to discuss these topics further. So this concludes the presentation part of this webinar. Here are again the links to the guides on our website. But we will now open up for questions from the audience as well. So are there any questions or thoughts or comments to us? You can either raise your hand or just speak up. So Gerhard has a question.
Yeah, thanks for the great, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, presentations. Just kind of, maybe it's a bit of detailed question, but with, let's say, the door example, how do you manage classification of categories versus attributes of doors? When you have, I think in a way it's also a good example, just like in materials and so on. The universe is so big, and different manufacturers or different organizations will, as you said at the beginning, have different perspectives, and so they will have different categorizations of things. So it's not just all. It's like, let's say, compare doors with materials. It's not just all doors, right? It's indoor doors, outside doors, doors for certain purposes, and so on. So there's this sort of categorization thing. And then on the other hand, you can say, well, we will just all do it by data, like metadata, like size, weight, or something like that. But there's always like this tension between these two types of doing things, right? And when you build an interoperability framework and the mappings and so on, that's quite important how you manage to do that, because, that creates maybe more work for the people that do the alignment versus or it becomes very difficult on the search side. What is your, experience now from the project, how to do that, how to manage that?
Well, I think that I mean, this is certainly a big challenge to actually in practice manage all these perspectives. And well, this is not magic also, so it doesn't solve itself magically, but at least you have the opportunity of creating these alignments and mappings here. And the ontologies that we've created are generic enough to cover these two perspectives, let's say, of having different categories and different characteristics of products, for example. But then, of course, there will be a lot of mapping that needs to happen if you want to translate between these things. So this is not something solved automatically. I mean, in our use cases in the project, I think we've seen that at a certain level, it is possible to create these mappings, but this may not be as easy in all cases, of course.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else wants to comment, then jump in if Ben wants to say something. Or no, okay, then thanks a lot, Gerard.
Yeah.
We can move to another question. We have Vibke.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the interesting presentation. It's very insightful because I'm also covering right at the moment data issues in the company. And I was wondering if you have a complex value chain and you said that you can create an ontology network. Like how big is the risk that you kind of have a duplication with regard to terms, or like how can you solve and avoid that you have duplications? Yeah. Maybe you can, I think it's kind of connecting to the previous comment. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I acknowledge this. And I mean, in principle, I mean, as I also answered to Gerard, I mean, it's not magic, it doesn't solve itself. But when you use also ontologies, you have the opportunity to go, let's say, beyond the terms. So you can have two different concepts that can be named the same with the same term, for example, but mean different things. So you can describe these kind of complex relations, let's say, that someone is using. Maybe one standard is using a term for something and another standard uses the same term, but for a different thing and so forth. So by, let's say, decoupling the terminology from the concepts, then you can at least describe these things. But of course, it doesn't automatically detect the situation, let's say, and so forth. But I think it at least allows you, when you discover this, you can describe it and you can say, okay, actually, I don't mean the same thing as this other data set that they use the same term, but it's a different thing. Or in the other way around, that, we call it differently, but it's actually the same thing and so forth. So you can describe quite complex relations between different attributes and so forth using these technologies.
And is that covered by the guide as well?
Well, it is at a quite high level. It is, yes. Okay. But if you want to have more details, I'm happy to also have a further discussion on that.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Are there further questions or comments? I don't see any more hands up. Any comments from my colleagues?
Just well done.
Okay. I mean, if there are no further comments on or questions, then I think we will just simply close this webinar. And as I told one of the the audience that we are very happy to discuss this further. And if you have questions, just let us know, and we are happy to follow up. Thanks a lot.